Two Guys in the Dark.
There was this old guy who lived with his wife and his dog a few doors away in a big house. He rarely left his home, and when he did, he only took his dog for a walk. He also talked very rarely and seemed to avoid other people. While his wife was somewhat more social, the couple lived on our street for a few years, and everything appeared to be just fine. However, one day they divorced, and the lady moved away for some reason. It was unknown to anybody. The old guy remained with the dog in his house, and a few years later had passed away. There was never something suspicious, and aside from his usual strange behavior, everything seemed pretty normal. One morning, that was approximately about 9 to 7 years ago, I left my house as usual to catch the school bus. Our street is relatively quiet, and normally there isn't much stuff going on. But this morning was a bit different. There was a few neighbors on the street, and my parents said that there was something wrong with the old guy, which lived on the end of the street. Nothing specific was known. So I went to school. I didn't think much about it. As I returned and exited the bus at the bus stop, I saw that the whole street was blocked off and evacuated. Police cars and officers were everywhere. Even a SWAT team was there. I had no idea what was going on. I met up with my parents, and they explained to me that the old guy tried to commit suicide and planned to take the whole street with him. He flooded his entire basement with gasoline, had an improvised bomb in his garden shed, which was essentially a big pile of propane gas tanks tied together. A timer clock and a toaster served as a fuse mechanism for both the bomb and the basement. The whole thing was rigged to explode between 7 and 8 o'clock in the morning. A smaller version of this was placed in a trash bin of the guy who happened to live right next to this maniac. Obviously, it was something personal. Before the old man had triggered it, he wrecked the entire interior of his house with an axe, and then went to the garage with his poor dog, locked the gate, and turned his car engine on. He put his dog in the trunk and seated himself in the driver's seat, waiting to die before that timer would even go off. Luckily, the plan didn't work out, because a neighbor had heard the car engine and became very suspicious. He looked through the garage window, and at first thought that the man had a heart attack, so he had broken the window and entered, only to see the man more or less conscious in his car. At first, he had no idea what was going on, but then he noticed the distinctive smell of gasoline. He broke the door to enter the house, and had discovered the mess that the old guy had created. The neighbor immediately called the cops, and the bomb squad took care of the explosives just in time. Unfortunately, the dog had suffocated in the trunk and was already dead when the neighbor had arrived. The authorities had arrested that guy and put him into a psychiatric ward after the court process. He will remain there until the end of his life. The estimated blast radius of it would have been sufficient enough to destroy several houses and do severe damage to the surrounding area. When I first moved into a new place in a new town, I had left home one evening and accidentally left my garage door open. I texted my husband to tell him so that he could go home and close it. He gets there and tells me that it's not open. That's pretty strange, but okay. The next day I'm taking my trash out, and my neighbor was outside. He introduced himself and told me the night before he noticed me leaving and that I left my garage door open, so he had went inside and closed it, and then let himself out through the front door, only locking the doorknob lock. Then he sent me a Facebook friend request. I'm assuming he looked at my mail on my counter to find out my full name. After this, he wrote me poems, and then taped them on my door, left gifts on the front porch, made crazy Facebook posts about a woman that he was in love with who was forbidden. By the way, I'm married. One Saturday night, I had came home really late. I was finishing my cigarette outside of my garage before going in. He was sitting outside in a chair, blistering drunk. He approaches me and started talking about someone named George. I had no idea what he was going on about, and I was really confused. I asked him if he happened to have company. He walked into the garage and came out with a box containing George. George was his stepdad, who happened to have passed away. The ashes were in the box. He caught wind of a trip that I was going on via Facebook and invited himself along. I politely explained that I'm married, and all of his wacky behavior was unacceptable. A few days later, I had gone on a walk with my husband. We left through the garage, leaving the front door open. He messages me on Facebook and told me that he left a gift for me in my garage. When I got back, I found a bunch of camping gear outside of a giant Easter egg. After I got back from the trip, he showed up at our door at midnight, drunk and banging on the door. We had to move. So they had tried to kill my dog because supposedly it was a death dog. She happened to be a white lab, and she was very sweet. We had a large fenced-in backyard. My dog wasn't terribly loud. She wasn't aggressive at all. She was just the size of a lab, and my neighbors, specifically the wife, thought that her larger size made her evil. They called the cops more than once, saying my dog was terrorizing the neighborhood. The cops came, met the dog, and we explained that she was always in her yard. They left saying just make sure that she stays in that yard. Well, the neighbor had called 2 more times to complain, and eventually they went and spoke with her about her ludicrous complaints. Here is when she started taking matters into her own hands. We noticed our dog was getting sick a lot. Like really, really sick. We took her to the vet. The vet said that we needed to stop feeding her human food. That could be bad for dogs. We had no clue what she was talking about. We went back home and decided to keep a closer eye on her. Turns out our neighbor had been dumping all manner of vile things over our fence, like food scraps, mop water, and God knows what else. We went and spoke with her about this. She denied it all. Finally, we caught the nasty woman on video and made sure that she saw us recording her. Later that night, the husband comes over and apologizes for his wife and begs us not to call the police on her. He promises that he'll ensure our dog is left alone. We agreed, but said if anything happens to our dog again, we would press charges. Thankfully, she stopped coming after our dog. She moved on to our landscaping. She climbed over the fence more than once to trim, but really hack and destroy our hedges and a few saplings. She even went and pulled all the flowers out of our flower bed that we had just planted. We went and spoke with her husband, as he was the saner of the two. The same conversation as about our dog. Eventually, she fell very ill and passed away. Her husband was like a completely different person. He invited us over for barbecues and all of that. Eventually, he even got himself a little dog. My parents' next-door neighbor, Nancy, had started with no trespassing signs in the backyard that faces our yard, and then nothing else. She set up a motion-activated floodlight that faces the side of our house, and nothing else. She stabbed our ball when it landed in her yard when we were just children. Called the cops on the neighbors because their dog barked constantly, despite them not even owning a dog. Thinks my mother, who happens to be the sweetest person that you can meet in this world, is a backstabbing traitor for warning the new neighbors not to let their kids play on Nancy's lawn. Verbally assaulted me for chasing deer out of our flower garden. But the true psycho moment came with the trees. We have large trees along the property line, just barely on our side, and she was starting to go all psycho about the tree, and it's gonna fall and crush her house, and demanded that it be cut down. We consulted an arborist who said that it did not need to be cut down, but it could use a trim. That would make it impossible to fall on her yard at all. The entire time that they were trimming, she had stalked the property line and screamed if anyone had stepped over it. While this trim was happening, a single stick had fell on her lawn. She lost it, threatened to call the cops, and told them that they better have all their licenses up to date. Arborist tried to blow her off, but my mom insisted that they check. Sent someone to City Hall and renewed their license. 30 minutes after that, a cop happened to show up to check as Nancy had called them. The arborists were super thankful for my mom warning them about this lady. My first apartment living away from home was in a small complex filled with retirees. My neighbor across the hall was a man, my ex, and I nicknamed Mr. Fire. He'd glare at me all the time and complain whenever I was sitting outside. He hated my cat and always assumed that I was a smoker. Young people and their cigarettes. You better not smoke around here. The lady down the hall from you is on oxygen, and she can smell it. How he got his nickname. Once I was walking to the bus stop before class, and X and I saw a garbage can smoldering in front of our building. It wasn't flaming, but there was a hole burned through it, and the plastic around the hole was melting. It had been a dry spring, so we were worried it might start an actual fire. X had ran inside to get the apartment manager, who happened to live one floor underneath me. When she came outside with the maintenance guy, who removed the can, she yelled at the neighbor's window, "Hey, you! What's the deal here?" Apparently this old guy, with the beginning stages of dementia, was cooking a steak in his kitchen when the meat lit on fire. He didn't know what to do, so he threw the entire pan in the garbage. But then the can started melting, so he thought that it would be a good idea to throw the whole thing out the window into a garden full of wood chips. He was eventually taken away to a retirement home after flushing his diapers down the toilet, bursting a pipe, and then flooding the laundry room. In this guy's defense, he told us that he had been doing it for years when he introduced himself after we bought the house. He also brought over frozen cookies in a plastic bag as a housewarming gift, but wasn't sure what was in them. We share a side yard, and as he was talking to us, I noticed that his all-brick house was actually roofing shingles, layered to look like brick. It started to register that he may be a little out there. He's a great neighbor, just an older, eccentric stoner who keeps to himself and eats my flowers. No shame. He comes over to my yard and eats my lilies raw, or brings scissors and clips the heads to boil and make jam. It's crazy to me, but we have embraced it. I planted a couple of raspberry, blackberry, and blueberry bushes 3 years ago, when we first moved in, on the side yard that we share, as well as a few knockout rose bushes. I told him to help himself to the berries or roses any time he wanted, especially before the birds do. The bushes have all gone insane, and the entire side of the house is now yearly buffet for our neighbor. Having a decent relationship with a crazy guy I share a property line with is definitely worth some dead-headed flowers.
If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe, like, and hit the bell for notifications on future videos, and become a stalker of the night. And I'll see you next time.